what's so interesting to me is I've been building this sort of materialist worldview and materialist story as I go on with this podcast. And I pick up another line from a different researcher, and it's building this materialist scaffold for me. And it seems like a really plausible story. It's incomplete. The jigsaw puzzle definitely has missing pieces, but I think I have a reasonable explanation for consciousness within a material worldview. And I'm really
Mhm.
curious why you think this fundamental consciousness idea is more likely. You're
Now
familiar
you
with,
now you need to give me the
yes.
explanation that you have.
Okay. Okay. So this really comes from, I think, Peter Godfrey Smith is a big, and Anil Seth are sort of big, inspirations of mine for these kind of ideas. So let's zoom back 800 million years ago, right? We have a basic organism in the sea, and it's developing its first kind of nervous systems. And the
Mhm.
way I think of these sort of basic nervous systems are that what they're for is for sensing in the environment, sensing sort of signals in the environment that are meaningful to that organism. So it's starting to differentiate signals, sort of such as this is dangerous, this is food, and then it's integrating those different environmental stimulus in relation to its own body state. So for me, this is where subjectivity starts to arise when you start integrating the information of there's food over there, but I ate 6 hours ago, so I only sort of need that food, and there's a predator over here, and all of these are coming in via different sensors and being integrated by that primitive neural net. And once you start integrating those different features together, the environmental stimulus with its own desire for basically persisting and living, that seems like subjectivity to me. That seems like agency. And for
Mhm.
me, that's really what consciousness is. It's a way to feel through complex problems. That's Mark Solms's words there. So consciousness is a control system evolved by an organism to feel its way through a complex problem. And that complex problem is there's food over there, but there's a predator over here, and I ate 6 hours ago, and last time I ate this happened, and last time I went there the predator. So all of these different features, you're integrating all of those different things. So for me, consciousness is really integrated information. So I draw a lot of things from IIT there as well. But that seems like a totally plausible scenario for me, and I get a few other points on that, I guess. So I don't think consciousness emerges from matter. I think that that's sneaking in dualism. I got that from David Papineau. He says I reject the hard problem because it sort of sneaks in dualism.
Mhm.
I just think that once you integrate all of those features, that's what consciousness is. And the reason it feels like something is because if hunger didn't feel like something, it wouldn't cause the organism to act. And then that organism might not be selected for when the organism that was hungry and felt that hunger viscerally in its body and caused it to act, that's going to outcompete the organism that didn't feel its way through that problem. And I know that there's holes in that jigsaw puzzle, but it's like that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Consciousness is a control system that evolved for an organism to feel its way through a complex problem. And it's crucially about integrating information. It's crucially about subjectivity and gaining agency. And all of the complexity we see in the human consciousness today is from millions of years of integrating different features. And I'm now whenever I make a decision, I'm integrating so much different. I need to go to the gym because I need to be fit, because I want to be attractive to women, because I want to help my heart health, because there's just so many different things that we're integrating into that conscious experience. And that's why now we have such a rich idea. But I think it started back there in the seas, in these basic neural networks that were making these very primitive integrations. Yeah, and that seems plausible to me. It makes sense. And then when you think about fundamental consciousness, I'm just like, that just seems like more of a stretch than that materialist organism view. But I'm curious, what do you
Mm.
think of that picture? What do you think about that narrative?
So I mean, I think it's actually a very interesting narrative for various for various reasons. I mean, some of the sources that you draw for from that already indicate that you would say, okay, consciousness is more a very primitive phenomenon. Actually, it's
Yes.
probably not related, only related to what's going on in the neocortex, for example. You said like 800 million years ago, this
Oh
stuff
yeah.
already happened, right? And you also reject dualism. You also said that.
Yes.
So I think the scenario that makes most sense in your picture would be something like a dual aspect monism, where you have one process and it appears in two different ways, something like that. And I think Max Holmes is also kind of on board with this kind of picture. Um, I think that's actually one of the. So if I weren't thinking or believing or taking a consciousness as fundamental stance, then I would probably then it would be one of the better candidates. And as you said, it's not a typical materialist theory with emergence and I don't know what. I kind of reject it. So I think that's already quite interesting. Difficult question, I think, for your explanation is when does information integration actually start?
Mm.
And what is this nature of information that you think about? Where does
Yes.
it come from? And how do you define it? I mean, we kind of always talk about information, and we mentioned this word, like we do not really think about it. But as soon as we start to think, what does information actually mean? Then we get actually into trouble. And I think a very nice perspective, which comes from this conscious agent stuff that I'm interested in, is to say, well, information is fundamentally constrained or defined even by something which is more fundamental than that. And candidate for that would be consciousness. So I think it somehow dovetails with what you outlined, but it gets a bit more radical than that even.
Yeah. I'd like to also say that I think the narrative that I laid out there, I think, is perfectly coherent with this fitness beats theorem, fitness
Mm,
beats truth evolutionary game theorem. I think it's perfectly coherent with that. Could you
okay.
talk about that work and that experiment you did? 'Cause I know we talked about it a little in the first conversation, but I find that really interesting, and I think that's quite instructive to how I've sort of sculpted that narrative as well. Can you talk about that work a bit?
Sure. So there's this old story about perception and veridicality. So how good does perception fit to the objective world? And the intuition that many people have, and probably I still have it to some extent, is that our perceptions need to be accurately reflecting what's going on in order to ensure certain fitness relevant processing, in order to facilitate survival. And in the fitness beats truth theorem, um, it tries to formalize this claim and puts it to test by using what's called evolutionary games, where you have organisms which represent some stuff, and based on this representation, they derive actions. So you said that basically what you say, consciousness is actually at the root of consciousness, experiencing the world and then acting on it.
Yeah.
And this fitness beats truth theorem is basically exactly based on this idea. And now you have a competition between, let's say, two kinds of strategies or two kinds of organisms. One that does whatever maximizes fitness or helps to optimize fitness, and one that tries to infer some objective structure and then optimizes fitness. And the fitness beats truth theorem tries to or shows mathematically that the first option is always more successful than the second one. So tuning your actions to fitness is always better than tuning it to some objective structure out there. Objective truth, as it was called in a paper, where truth is somehow confusing some people. It's not meaning, well, there's this long discussion, what is truth actually? But here in this context, truth just means something which holds independent from the perceiver or the observer or the creature that is engaged in this process. So something like an objective notion.
This makes
And
complete
the
sense to
truth
me.
theorem always says that takes the back seat when it comes to these competition processes.
Yeah. I think we have a really clear example of this, which is just color perception. Color is just wavelengths of light, but a highly useful way of interpreting wavelengths of light is to differentiate based on some color perception. It means that we can tell when an apple is ripe and not ripe. That's some of the earlier evolutionary ideas for why we developed color vision was like, so early animals can figure out when food was good to eat or what food was poisonous to us or what food. So that makes sense to me. That is a way that we have taken a signal from bedrock reality, which is light in different wavelengths, and we have developed a perceptual system, a way of interpreting that information that's useful for us. But like color doesn't exist in any way. There is no objective color. So I think that's just maybe a useful framework to understand an example of that. But there's clearly many examples of this.
Yeah.
But these that's what I mean. These simulations, I think, are perfectly coherent with current sort of neuroscience ideas of predictive processing, constructed emotions. All of these ideas are very coherent with those ideas. So what I don't understand is that you have these nice evolutionary games that prove perception evolves for fitness over truth. Absolutely. Where does the next step come from of saying consciousness is fundamental when that, like, those game theory simulations seem like evidence for, all of very current neuroscience, the most current ideas around predictive processing and everything else.
Yes, I think that's an important point. The interface theory of perception is to some extent metaphysically neutral. It doesn't force you on any particular specific point, although it suggests a kind of, well, a quasi-transcendentalist approach. I don't know whether that
Could you
resonates
define? I
somehow.
think quasi-transcendentalist might
There's
require
a
some.
well-known philosopher, German philosopher Immanuel Kant, and he said like, okay, the way how we or there's this famous quip. Now I need to translate it in my head because I only read it in German. That that our cognition doesn't follow the object, but the objects follow our cognitions.
Right.
Cognition is a bit of a unfortunate translation actually, but it's the kind of how we get to know how we know the world.
Yeah.
And I think it's very similar to what you say what you would say in interface theory. And you're right, you could try to embed that into a perfectly standard or mainstream neuroscience perspective. I think that's perfectly fine. The only difficulty, or maybe not the only difficulty, but one difficulty is if you want to try to talk about consciousness based on that, how to fit in consciousness there. And there it depends a bit on whether you take the hard problem seriously or not. If you don't take it
I
seriously,
don't tend to take it that seriously.
then you could say, okay, I don't take it seriously, and I apply maybe this idea. So maybe our kind of perception of subjective things in the world is a somewhat useful fiction or something like that. I think you can go there actually. Logically, that seems to be possible to go there. I'm not sure whether it's really a comfortable place to go, because then in the end you are kind of
I'm not sure any of this is comfortable.
yeah, no, probably not. You end up with a very deflationary view about consciousness. But I think it's logically quite coherent to do that actually. And you might say you have the approval of neuroscience and of physics when you do that. So
Yeah.
that's on your side actually. Now, if you take the hard problem seriously, and if you think that there is a difficulty in making this jump from physics or from information processing to consciousness, then you might also choose to go the other way. You might say, oh, well, let's start with consciousness and then say, okay, the physical world is this interface stuff. And I think that's very close to what I and Don and others are doing. You could actually also have this option to say, okay, you take neither consciousness nor physical stuff. You take something else. But then you even have more work.
Yeah.
The Giant Shoulder mission is to explore radical ideas in biology, neuroscience, and consciousness, and elevate those stories to the highest possible level while keeping them accessible to everyone. If this interests you and you want to support independent science, then please consider subscribing to the Clips channel. Check out our 26 Neuroscience book. You can download it for free or get a beautiful physical copy, and check out these giant moments next. Thank you so much.